My main grievance with Marxism isn't the economics. It isn't the authoritarianism either, though there is plenty to criticize on both fronts. My issue with Marxism is mainly spiritual and metaphysical. Marxists, both historically and currently, claim to be liberated from religious dogma. They are materialist, meaning if something cannot be empirically measured, it is not real, and anyone who claims otherwise is an agent of capitalist oppression. But whether they realize it or not, they still serve forces beyond human comprehension. I can say, rather confidently, that Marxists worship the Demiurge. And for those of you unfamiliar with the occult tradition of Gnosticism, the Demiurge is a false god who rules over the physical realm. His goal is explicit: to keep souls trapped in the material so that they never return to heaven. The Demiurge is a jailer who tells people to worship their own jail cell. That, to me, is the spiritual instinct at the heart of Marxism. Marxism tells a man that he is not a timeless soul, momentarily incarnated in human flesh, but a worker whose life exists to serve as a node in a machine. The issue with this is that the human being does not see himself as a worker. Nobody looks in the mirror and says, "Ah, yes, I am an interchangeable economic unit whose entire being can be reduced to class dynamics." Whether the human being outwardly admits it or not, he knows he is something greater than a hungry primate in search of his next meal. So the Marxist tells him his salvation will come through politics and wealth redistribution. But politics does not tell a man how to cope with his dying child. Wealth redistribution does not tell a man why he should forgive his father's cruelty. Frankly, Marxism fails to tell a man why he should endure suffering at all. Historically, that has been the role of spirituality. People often claim that spirituality was an archaic tool of understanding nature. We didn't understand why it rained, so we said Zeus made it rain. But that was only part of it. The greater utility was that it gave human beings a way to find meaning in the most abysmal aspects of being alive. Aspects that cannot be solved by economics. Let's say a young mother gives birth to a child with severe birth defects. Telling her, "Don't worry, the socialized medical system will take care of him," does not actually help her cope with the psychological horror of creating a life that will live in agony. That is a metaphysical wound, and materialism has no tools to address that. And that is why I do not experience Marxism as merely mistaken. I experience it as spiritually hostile. Because once a worldview treats matter as ultimate, anything that points beyond matter becomes a threat. Priests, monks, mystics, monasteries, temples, and shrines, all of those represent a rival account of reality. They imply that a human being is more than their productive function. They imply that suffering is not merely a technical problem to be fixed by wealth redistribution. They imply that the state is not ultimate, that labor is not a person's value, and that appetite is not the main driver of history. And that is exactly why Marxist systems, when given real power, so often turn on the spiritual, with an almost compulsive violence and aggression. The Bolsheviks took power in 1917, and by the end of 1923, they'd already killed 2,700 Orthodox priests, 3,400 Orthodox nuns, and 2,000 Orthodox monks. These were people of God. The Metropolitan Vladimir of Kiev tortured and shot in 1918. Metropolitan Benjamin of Petrograd. He was given a show trial and executed by a firing squad in 1922, all because he wouldn't let the Bolsheviks loot church relics. Then you get to the Great Purge of 37 and 38, and the numbers go absolutely insane. Soviet archives show over 106,000 Orthodox clergy and monastics were executed. The NKVD literally had quotas for killing, quote, churchmen. Alexander Yakovlev, this is a former Politburo member who actually accessed the KGB archives after the USSR fell, confirmed that they shot over 85,000 priests in 1937 alone. Over 85,000 in 1 year. So it's one thing to say, we disagree with your superstitious beliefs. It's another thing to murder people by the tens of thousands over it. And Marxism, historically, had a knack for that. This is the Demiurge's compulsion made flesh. The jailer cannot tolerate witnesses to a world outside the jail cell. You could also look at China. 1951, just 2 years after Mao takes over. They expel or arrest basically the entire Catholic clergy. Bishop Wang Chongyi survived, and what he testified about was horrific. Priests were buried alive, beaten to death, starved to death, and burned alive. His quote sticks with me. Quote, "They are martyrs who were buried alive, beaten, and starved to death under the communists. Saints whose sufferings will remain forgotten. The Chinese authorities have erased them, but only God knows the whole story, and myself, I saw it." And the Buddhists, they got it just as bad as the Catholics. Tibet, 1959, you had roughly 2,500 monasteries. Within 3 years, only 70 still remained. That is a 97% erasure. Thousands of monks were executed. Then the Cultural Revolution hits, and they destroy nearly all of Tibet's 6,000 monasteries. Thousands of monks were jailed, executed, and driven into exile. How could you look at one of those jolly, peaceful, bald-headed motherfuckers meditating in the mountains with their orange sash and go, "Yep, he is a threat to our system. Torture him to death and burn his temple to the ground"? That's quite demiurgic to me. I could see some false god that wants to keep us trapped in the physical realm pushing such an ideology. And you see, to the regime, monasteries were living proof that man doesn't exist just to produce, consume, obey, and die. And for a worldview that can't tolerate anything above matter, anything above the Demiurge's prison, that kind of witness must be destroyed. The spiritual man, by his very existence, rebukes that whole metaphysic position. He stands there, poor, celibate, contemplative, and owning nothing, and his life declares that man is ordered upwards towards something higher than the physical world. A regime built on material finality cannot tolerate that. Whenever I point this out, online Marxists try to wriggle free. They'll tell me, no, Marxism just cares about real life. We don't care about superstition and fantasy. We care about things like hunger, class domination, and physical suffering. But for me, the deeper problem is that Marxism cannot tolerate a man who defeats suffering inwardly. Someone who doesn't need external circumstances to rid him of suffering. It cannot tolerate the monk who is poor but happy. Because if you can be happy while poor, then they can't motivate you to kill for their regime and die for their regime. The Marxist needs you to believe that only they can save you. And now I would like to talk about the most sinister aspect of the Marxist religion, and that's its view on free will. Marxism, at its core, is a deterministic worldview. It thinks that reality is a series of falling dominoes. Things happen because something happened before it. And now that sounds like an intuitive belief, and it's usually used to suggest that man has no control over his life and his destiny. But funny enough, modern quantum physics actually disagrees with this. Physics suggests that reality is probabilistic, and the future is not a fixed point, but always in flux. That is important because spiritual paths, like Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and all of the others that were lined up and shot by Marxists, all say that you have free will, and that you could shape your destiny and carve your intentions into the world. They say that your fate is not predetermined, but instead shaped by your own moral actions. And that is intolerable to Marxism, because the entire system depends on telling man that he is downstream from material condition. Free will is dangerous Because the moment a man can truly choose, then he is not just clay in the hands of economics and bureaucrats. If he can truly choose, then he can repent, renounce, forgive, endure, transcend, and most importantly of all, disobey. He can break with his class. He could refuse the script. He could turn inward and discover a sovereignty no regime can manufacture. And that is why Marxism has to sneer at free will. It has to reduce choice to illusion, because otherwise, human beings become something more than matter arranged by policy and force. He becomes a soul. A soul introduces a breach in the whole system, a freedom that cannot be planned or administered. And now I want you to listen to me very clearly. If you are a Marxist and you're listening to this video, and you feel like you're drawn to this ideology because you actually give a damn about suffering people, because you see the poor getting ground into dust and something in you says this is wrong, then I am not demonizing you. I am not saying you are a bad person. I'm warning you. That anger you feel at exploitation, that desire to defend the weak and dethrone evil, do not let anyone tell you that is merely class instinct or material self-interest. That is the sacred tugging at your heart. That is your soul recognizing the holy and crying out for justice. The very essence that makes you want to destroy evil is the essence that connects you to heaven. But be weary. Seriously, be very weary of any ideology that tries to sever that impulse from the sacred itself. Because what good is a dictatorship of the proletariat if the proletariat knows not the sacred? What have you built if the proletariat is fed but the soul is denied? And that is the horror of Marxism. It takes one of man's highest impulses, his pity for the downtrodden, his hatred for cruelty, his longing for solidarity, and funnels them into a system that denies the very thing that created those impulses, his soul, his connection to what Christians call God, to what Plato called the good, to what Buddhists call nirvana, and to what the Hindus call Brahman, and what Marxists call a delusional threat to their system. That is how mercy ends in mass graves. This is why the Demiurge is the perfect symbol for that kind of false liberation. In the old Gnostic world, the Demiurge is not the highest god, but a lesser power who mistakes the lower world for the whole of reality. He cannot save your soul because he does not even recognize the soul. This is why I say the Marxist worships the Demiurge. The Demiurge is not just the jailer. He is the jailer who convinces you the jail is all there is. Marxism does not free you from the Demiurge. It teaches you to worship him.